Hello, I'm Julian Whittle, the Chamber's Business Engagement Manager, and I'm with Rob Johnston, our Chief Executive. And we've been having a look at the government's new industrial strategy, which was published this week. It's a document that's of great interest to us because the Chamber carried out a really large-scale consultation earlier in the year when the government produced a green paper on industrial strategy. And we convened focus groups and we sent questionnaires to businesses, and we ended up submitting a lengthy response along with about 2,000 other organisations. And we've been waiting with interest to see what would come of it. And here it is. So, Rob, what's your initial take on the strategy?
Well, I don't think it's what we expected, Julian. If you look at the Green Paper, the document the government published, as you mentioned earlier, to seek views of businesses and business organisation, it had a very different structure, I think, to this. It was looking at, I think, 10 pillars, and as a result, I think we expected something that looked more like some of the strategies we've seen over the years. I mean, go back to the days of Regional Development Agency and the RDA strategy, which I had a little bit to do with in my day with the RDA, really set a list of issues that we felt at the time were barriers to the economy of the Northwest developing. And then we went out to partners with some funding behind it to say, how would you challenge these issues? And if it's a good challenge, we'll pay for it. So, you know, that's your sort of classic intervention strategy. Here's the challenge is there's a pot of money, show some innovation and come forward, and if it delivers what we think and you can evidence it, we'll support it. This is quite different. And I think what's caught a lot of commentators out is that it, on the surface, looks more like an aspiration for where society is going as opposed to an industrial strategy that tackles productivity.
Well, that's a very good point, because it sets out what they call the grand challenges. There are 4 of these grand challenges, and they're around artificial intelligence and the data economy, clean growth, the future of mobility, and the last one is the ageing society. Now, to me, that doesn't sound particularly like business challenges.
And I think that's the point, Julian, is that what they're trying to say is as we move out of Europe and we go into the world, I'm second guessing here, then, you know, society has to support, you know, our aspirations, and our aspirations should be beyond just, you know, running a business. But I think that is part of the problems with this strategy, if we just dwell on this for a moment, in that it isn't an interventionist strategy. Now, this government said they were going to intervene. I think you're probably able to quote the Prime Minister.
She actually says it in the foreword to this document, funnily enough.
To be fair, those grand challenges just do not fit with my mindset of where we need to get, what we address as an economy, which is getting to grips with investment and productivity.
Well, that's interesting, because when you start to get into the meat of the document, the diagnosis of what's wrong, I don't think we would disagree with. They talk about weak productivity. Well, we knew about that. The fact that growth's too concentrated on London, the need to export more. All those things are self-evident, but its approach to how to tackle those is more questionable.
I think it makes a little bit more sense when you look at the next level down, which is what they call the 5 foundations. Which are ideas, people, infrastructure, business environment and places. So it begins to address some of the mechanics, I think, through the 5 foundations. It's not necessarily where we would have gone. We would have probably said the foundations are skills, productivity, much more sort of hard than that. But I think in the tackling the 5 foundations, it's heading in the right direction, I think. I think that's more valuable, I guess, than the challenges.
What struck me is that in some ways you maybe expect a government document to be political, but it is quite a political document. There's a certain level of spin to it. For example, I think there's a definite attempt to project the UK as this centre of technology, cutting edge technology. There's a claim in there that artificial intelligence could add 232 billion to our economy. I'll say that again, 232 billion. That's a huge sum of money. By 2030, which actually, isn't that long away. They want self-driving cars on UK roads by 2021. The word innovation, I believe, I haven't actually counted it myself, but apparently it's there 502 times in its 255 pages. And you know what it reminded me of? is Harold Wilson's famous speech in 1963 when he talked about a new Britain forged in the white heat of scientific revolution. And I wonder, maybe they're trying a little bit too hard.
Yes, I think going back to the 60s, I can just bear to remember it, there were some quite exciting things happening. I think, to be fair to Harold Wilson, he had the real commercialisation of nuclear power, Concorde was coming along, there were lots of things that were quite exciting. We're in a very different world. And I think you're probably right in that parallel, because what they're trying to say is artificial intelligence and the way it will be utilised across our lives is quite important. So coming back to those challenges, it's about life changes and the influence of the economy on life. So I get that. It just still feels a little bit like it's written by another consultant. Guys but I think it's probably worth stepping through it, Julian, I think, because there are some nice sort of nice nuggets in there which are worth exploring and that businesses might be interested in.
Well, exactly. I mean, some of the things that we asked for in our submission are in there, which is good. I mean, there was the ideas around commercialising a lot of the excellent research that goes on in our universities, but doesn't necessarily follow through into business applications. They've got ideas around how to get businesses involved.
I think that there's an issue on there that's worth exploring, because we've long since had this challenge in Cumbria with how we get the ideas out of Sellafield, for example, which is sort of the equivalent of a large university on the doorstep, and we've been singularly poor at getting ideas of systems and processes and turn them into business and commercialise it, and take that international. My concern, I think, on that is it does appear to give the responsibility as much to universities. And I guess some of that's to do with the university lobby about their role in society. And I have to be perfectly frank on this, and I've worked with some of the top universities in the UK over the years on relationship with business. Universities tend to be codifiers. They write down what they see. They're not innovators. The innovation comes out of the business. And the university tends to copy that. And I would like to have seen a wider constituent of that group that had more organisations like Chambers of Commerce and others who can help promote and develop ideas through some sort of structure. So it's good, but I'm slightly concerned that it's not a wide enough group that's going to make that work. I
mean, they talk about innovation clusters centred on universities, but the acid test is whether or not they'll be able to make that leap from universities coming up with ideas to businesses working with them to apply them.
Yeah, there is a figure in here, I think, around about. I think it's to try and demonstrate that we should be seeing more innovation out of business. And they quote a figure, I think, was it 400 businesses accounting for 75% of the R&D.
They do, yeah.
And that doesn't equate to any information we've had previously that suggests that a huge amount of innovation comes out of SMEs, new starts and fast-growing businesses that, because of the nature, are reinventing themselves, reinventing their ideas. So I think that sort of suggests that, and I guess one of the things that we noticed in this document, it's very light on the SME component, which is the majority of businesses in the UK.
Yeah, and especially so in Cumbria, where we've got even a greater proportion of SMEs, and they are very much the dynamic part of the economy. There is, I mean, you mentioned R&D. There's a lot of emphasis on that. Government's pledging to spend more on R&D, taking total spend to 3% of GDP eventually. No date on that, but it's an aspiration. But at least it's good to see, because I noticed in the budget last week, they raised the R&D tax credit. So they are actually doing things to help make this a reality. It's not just all. I
guess that's the problem, Julian, isn't it? We were hoping to see maybe between this and the budget some more mechanics put in place that would help productivity through promoting investment and more incentives. And we talked about the R&D tax credit many times. It's an underused thing, and businesses should really look at, whether they can get more out of that than they're getting at the moment. And I guess that's one of the other things. It's difficult to see where it says where government's going to play its role around regulation, around taxes. This is what I mean about this being more aspirational, forward thinking. I mean, one of the things that is quite nice is that, as many people know, we sort of invented the concept of growth hubs, and it's been incredibly successful at delivering intervention support for business across a whole range of services. And it's good to see there's a commitment to continue some support for that. We've yet to see what that means and what sort of outputs government want to buy from the growth hubs, and whether that fits where we know business is looking for support.
There is a mention as well in the document of what will replace EU structural funds after Brexit, and it reaffirms this idea of there's going to be a UK shared prosperity fund, which will make the same sort of interventions, but not necessarily in exactly the same way. So that could very much affect the growth of model, because many of the programmes are delivered with European money at the moment.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that's going to be interesting to watch on that is that European funding tends to support what's called market failure, which is areas where, the sort of names, the hint in the name really, where it's difficult to get things up and running. Yeah. And government to date have tended to back winners. Now, it requires both sides, we believe. In areas where there is significant challenge, intervention of the public pound can have really good return, and it creates businesses that are sustainable, that pay tax. The danger is that it goes back into the early days of just backing what they see as surefire winners. I guess that's probably a good point to look at what the sector deals that I mentioned, Julian, because I think what a lot of expectation was around sector deals, and it's worth mentioning that sectors come in and out of fashion. They were very fashionable at one point, and then they were very out of fashion, and we're sort of sliding into a sort of semi-fashionable position. And it's worth mentioning how those deals are structured, because they're not about just making a wodge of money available for a sector, are they?
It's not about picking favourites, and I think this is where perhaps some commentators have misunderstood this strategy. It's not about choosing sectors that the government thinks are going to be tomorrow's winners and then backing them with either subsidies or other help. It's more about enabling. So, for example, we call for sector deals for three sectors that are vital to Cumbria: nuclear, tourism and food and drink. Now, of those, only nuclear is at an advanced stage. But the idea would be that there might be skill shortages, or there might be regulatory issues that particular, any one of those sectors is facing, and that government might be able to help by changing the law or introducing new courses in FE colleges or whatever, to help ease those particular issues. I mean, coming to that nuclear sector deal, because that does earn a mention in the report, we were a bit disappointed with that, because there doesn't seem to be any enthusiasm in there for nuclear new build, which of course would be huge for Cumbria if the Moorside project were to go ahead. It's interesting that the section on the sector deal, it does say that nuclear energy is part of the energy mix, but they're talking there about the existing nuclear power stations. There's no reference to new build. There's no reference to either Moorside or the Horizon project on Anglesey in Wales. And all the stress seems to be on reducing the cost of nuclear energy and reducing the cost of decommissioning.
And I think that's very admirable in reducing the cost, because I think we've said many times, whilst we're very pro-nuclear and certainly large-scale nuclear, whether that's traditional nuclear or small modular reactors, which are coming out in some of the conversations from government at the moment, point is, if you look at some of the challenges we're going to face in the future, there was an expectation, I think, that as our high energy use industry was shrinking and businesses would become more aware of energy costs and invested in putting money into making sure they could reduce their energy bills. The thing that's coming at us like a truck full of batteries is the need for what's going to be a need for huge amounts of power and energy distributed around the UK to support the electric vehicle programs.
Yeah.
I think it's worth mentioning that, Julian, in terms of the scale of this challenge.
It is, because actually that struck me as there's a contradiction in the strategy, because on the one hand, there is no enthusiasm for nuclear new build, and in fact in that respect it reminded me very much of the Conservative election manifesto, which mentioned both shale gas and renewables at some length and didn't mention nuclear. But at the same time, coming back to this industrial strategy, that talks about rolling out electric cars. And interestingly, National Grid have done some research on this, and they're looking at a sort of a worst case scenario. But they reckon that by 2050, if we're all driving around in electric vehicles and all goods are moving in electric wagons, then there'll be an extra 18 gigawatts of additional capacity at peak times. Now, to translate that into English, you're talking about the equivalent of 6 more sites in order to provide that. So, it would seem that if they're serious about the one, then they ought to be serious about nuclear energy.
And I think this is coming back to their great grand challenges. This is where I think it makes a little bit of sense when you look at the future of mobility. This is where I think you can start to get a feeling for how we're going to, what network's going to be in place to allow people to move around as cleanly as possible. You're looking at a distribution system there that gets that power where it's needed, and that's going to require a major rethink to the way the grid operates and the way you get power into garages, for example, in a very small scale to charge the cars they're working on. Interesting challenge.
And to be a bit more positive, the section of the strategy that I think we can be most encouraged by is the section on skills and training, which is very much along the lines with what businesses told us when we consulted them. They want more emphasis on basic skills, particularly maths tuition, STEM subjects in general, including at primary schools, reforms to try and give vocational education the same prestige and status as a degree, which the government's already started with its plans for T-levels. All this chimes in with what employers told us, isn't it? Are you be happy with that section, Rob? I
think we are. I think, to be fair, when you get into the detail, a lot of what we fed in based on the evidence from businesses we've spoken to actually are nested in there. And I guess that's one of the things that we need to be watching for in the future as various documents spin out from this strategy. They'll point back to this as a sort of mother document, and I think we're pleased that as you go through the document in the various areas, skills being a good example, business support being another, at least government does appear to be listening, because up until now it's been very difficult to see how this government has been pro-business. It seems to be obsessed with itself and obsessed with Brexit, but not obsessed in a way that they should be with business if it wants productivity to move forward. So I'm hoping that as we go forward and other documents emerge as subsets of this strategy, the anchors are in there on the basis of the things like you just mentioned, Julian, on skills, business support and others, investment, that allow government where it wants to and can afford to invest to do some proper intervention along the lines we'd understood it in the past.
Well, because the other big one for us is infrastructure, because not just roads and railways, but things such as mobile phone coverage and broadband are not as we would want them yet. Now, interestingly, they make some encouraging noises about investing across all regions of the UK. That was a phrase I picked out more than once to suggest perhaps that they realise that too much investment's been concentrated on London in the past.
Well, one of the things to think about on infrastructure, for example, if you look at the north of England, the whole concept of moving the economy from London. Over the last couple of weeks, we've seen a budget that promotes house building on that sort of arc around the north of London, which is clearly London focused. What doesn't appear to be coming out of this is the work that was done around connecting Liverpool, Manchester, Leeds, Newcastle, which was the original Northern Powerhouse concept. And some of the stats I've seen on that, Julian, suggest that if that was invested in significantly, and it's the sort of thing only government can move because it's big investment, it's not another roundabout, that would significantly move the economy. And it's disappointing that isn't coming out in here. The affirmation and support for investment in the north, and I mean Cumbria in north, which would actually start to put together that infrastructure that would make the north work as an economy. It's disappointing that isn't there, really.
It wouldn't help us in Cumbria particularly, but HS3, the high-speed rail that would link Liverpool, Manchester, Leeds and Newcastle would actually be more beneficial to the north of England than HS2.
But it does help us, you see, because we're on the edge of that economic opportunity, and a lot of what we have to offer around our tourism visit economy offer will benefit from that, and we've seen that already. So you don't have to be in the middle, you don't have to be in the middle of Manchester to benefit from the north of England doing well. For a lot of our industries, we could do well out of the north of England doing very well, and that sort of infrastructure, the HS3, is exactly the one I had in mind when I was thinking about what I said earlier. That's the sort of thing which completely changes the game. And that's the sort of investment I think would have a bigger impact than, say, HS2.
One last point, really, because I noticed there's a tone in here that I've come across in other good government documents, and indeed in the budget last week. A lot of the spending seems to be going to areas that have got directly elected mayors. And I notice in here there's a proposal for local industrial strategies, which in areas with elected mayors would be led by the mayor. In areas like ours where we don't have that, it would be the LEP's responsibility. But I just wondered, do you think maybe Cumbria is missing out by not having a combined authority and elected mayor?
Well, I think we have, and I think Cumbria was made to pay at the last round of bidding that we bid for 160 million and got 12, I think. I think that was a demonstration of that. I think also that we're now talking about a Borderlands initiative which takes into account South West Scotland. Not necessarily bad for Cumbria, certainly not bad for North Cumbria, that it's now at least in getting some focus of activity and potentially some sort of investment. But I think this government has made it clear for some time that if you have an elected mayor, then you will get money from central government, because they see the elected mayor as being the accountable person for that extra funding that you wouldn't get in any other way. So there's still a challenge for Cumbria, I think, to move forward on this. This government have said prior to this strategy that its appetite had moved on. There were more important things, but it's still doing deals. There's still a deal mentioned in the budget, as you know, for North Tyneside. So I think there's still hope for Cumbria. We maybe need to get our act together and get in there, because it's clear that you're going to get that investment. Going back to the local version of the industrial strategy, the Cumbria LEP strategy at the moment is a four-pronged attack with underpinning themes, quite similar in some sort of way to this, although slightly more focused than this. It's going to be interesting challenge for the LEP to be able to support this as a strategy, because realistically what you want as your local strategy is something more of a toolbox to make the economy work, and something less aspirational. So it's going to be fascinating, I think, Julian, to see what the local strategies come out like that sit underneath this one.
That's a good point on which to end. Thanks very much, Rob, and thank you for listening.